The mission of the Clarke Historical Museum is to celebrate the rich and varied history of Northwestern California by preserving, sharing, and interpreting that history in ways that increase knowledge, engage the mind, enrich the spirit, and stimulate the imagination.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Josh Buck, and I'm the Executive Director Curator of the Clarke Historical Museum. I am pleased to introduce a man with an unparalleled passion for the history of deltiology of all things Humboldt County. Deltiology, of course, means the study and collection of postcards. This man is Steve Lazar. Steve is a board member and former president of the Humboldt County Historical Society, a senior planner with the Humboldt County Planning Commission, a longtime resident of Eureka, and the postcard collecting king of all things Humboldt. And he's here to share his insights and knowledge with us tonight. Steve, why don't we start out by having you introduce yourself a bit more on your background and tell me what your earliest memories of moving to Humboldt to go to school and your many jobs of working in the great outdoors around here were like.
Thanks, Josh. It's nice to join you today. Yeah, I moved here in 1995. My start in Humboldt is much like many. I was a college student at Humboldt State University, now called Poly Humboldt. I had moved here from Ventura County, where I grew up, and I had been here one other time prior on a road trip with one of my two older brothers, probably my sophomore year in high school. And that's sort of what led me to move up here. But I remember upon arriving, I don't think I realized, I know I didn't realize it at the time, but I now know that I have a real passion for geography that revealed itself in the years that followed. And so reflecting on arriving here in 95, I quickly became obsessed with trying to get the lay of the land. This was a completely foreign place to me for the most part. And I thankfully had a good friend who had moved here at the same time from the same area. And him and I we would go on our bicycles and ride in all the cardinal directions. We didn't have cars, so we just had to use what we had available to us. I remember one time we rode up Highway 299 and got all the way to Lord Ellis Summit, but we didn't even know where we were going until we hit that spot. We thought, okay, we've done something. This is a landmark. We rode to Orick, rode to Ferndale. So that began kind of in me a real fascination with this area, and it never stopped. If anything, it accelerated. And through my career in the planning department and the jobs I've had prior to that, I've just been able to basically explore the area. And my dirty little secret, a lot of people think of me as someone who's really into local history, but I often have to counter that I'm really just really into geography, and history is another way to access geography, and it's an important part of understanding a landscape and whether it's a cultural landscape or a physical landscape. And I can say one other thing that is almost like a dream, but I know you'll resonate with, is that the trains were running, and not for very long, but they were running, and I have distinct memories of seeing them traveling along the highway corridor and the railroad right of way. And if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I frankly still have a hard time remembering, like believing it, but I know I did. So those were some of the kind of initial scenes that I remember very, very vividly. And they really just kind of basically got me hooked on this area. And I've been grateful ever since to be able to stay.
You mentioning seeing local railroad activity around here, and our railroad closed in 1998. And that kind of leads into our next question, which is, what has changed about Humboldt County since you've moved here, aside from the closing of our local railroad that you recall?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. So I think, one of the most obvious changes perhaps is is sort of a transition in the cannabis industry. I think that is something that I wasn't aware of when I moved here. I mean, we all had heard, it was certainly something it was on my radar, but I've had a firsthand seat to watching an industry daylight that had here to, until 2015 was largely not something to be talked about in public, and uh, had a silhouette or a shadow that cast on everything around us, but yet was never really discussed at length. And then watching in the time since the passage of local regulations and state regulations in 2015, and now it's remarkable the transition. I mean, there's a lot of sadness and tragedy to it, and there's a lot of possibility and excitement around it. It's an important milestone, and it's still playing out, quite frankly. And it's almost impossible to emphasize the significance of that transition that's still underway. Because living up here, oftentimes you'd meet someone, you'd never ask what they do for a living. It was just kind of an unwritten rule. And there were people around me that just led lifestyles that didn't make sense. There was businesses in the community that you didn't understand why we had so many of this business that didn't seem financially practical to operate. And so yeah, I'm excited because I've gotten to see that geography, that landscape up close and personal. And I think it's a painful transition we're underway, but it will ultimately make us a stronger and more resilient county in the days ahead. So I would say that is the most profound change that I've witnessed during my time here.
I can definitely see that as someone who's gone out to a lot of rural communities here in the county, going to some very seldom visited corners of those communities too. Legalization has changed a lot of things. And I remember the first time I would go to a place like Whitlow in southern Humboldt, and uh, driving that access road to it, and every property that we went past must have had a 12-foot high fence around it, and you just couldn't see up anybody's driveway or anything. We had a pit bull chase my truck for almost a mile, just driving down there, and uh, came back a couple of years later post legalization, and a lot of those fences had come down. I saw a lot of water running in the creeks that previously was bone dry at that same time of year. So it's not only changing our local economy, but the face of the places that we frequent and live in. And I agree that in the long run, I think it's going to be very beneficial for our community, especially those that are now making it a cornerstone of business here in Humboldt for sure. What has remained the same in your estimation around here since you first moved?
Well, it I would say we've lost some buildings, but for the most part, the city of Eureka enjoys a collection of both residential, commercial, and industrial development that's really unparalleled in terms of any place on the West Coast, as far as I'm concerned. There's an expression that I heard a long time ago that poverty is a friend of preservation, right? That when areas are depressed, they're just not resources to redevelop sites into new uses and new structures. And I think the tale of Eureka and Humboldt County, frankly, is that we've undergone periods of economic decline and stagnation. And as a consequence of those painful periods, we still have a lot of the built environment. However, people often misunderstand that built environment is just a period that's not the earliest period of our Humboldt history. It's just kind of the turn of the century period for the most part. But nevertheless, it's remarkable, and it's a treasure, really. And I think as a Eureka resident, as someone who's lived and worked in Eureka for over almost 20 years now, um, I I experience it on a daily basis, and it is a real it provides a real value to me. And also as a collector of images, of historical images, it's just so exciting to think of the possibilities of the juxtaposition of the past and the present, and the landmarks that exist. The community I grew up in, Thousand Oaks in Ventura County, the oldest building in that town was a Mexican restaurant from the early 60s, and that was my experience of historical landscapes before moving here. And that's, I think, what is so exciting about living here, is that the past is all around you, and still quite accessible, and making that jump from today to yesterday, whether it's yesterday of 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I'm addicted to that, and the images that I collect and the experiences that I seek out in my travels and adventures around the county are constantly in service of that. So I would say that, Eureka hasn't changed a whole lot. It's changed in some exciting ways in terms of the development and investment and new arrivals. And it's always said that, like, or I've said, I guess, in the past, but watching Eureka change is like watching a flower grow. You can't, see it live, but you turn your head away and turn back, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's got a petal on the blossom, so it's changed, and there are a lot of things around us, but it's changing in a way that I think is really just deepening the roots, and giving us a better chance at a more resilient future, I think.
Absolutely. What led to your interest in architectural history? I know you've taken some classes at College of the Redwoods, but was there something that like really hooked you during those classes, or like a site visit that may have occurred back then that just made you go like, wow, this is some really interesting stuff?
It's a good question. I don't know if I've ever pinpointed it. I can say, though, quite confidently that Bill Hull, as the sort of patriarch of the historic preservation and restoration technology program at College of the Redwoods, the now defunct program, he's a remarkable person. He can soften the hardest of hearts, in my opinion. I've watched him take people that are not at all sympathetic or interested in historical things, and really just open their eyes. He's just got a talent for that. So if I had to guess, he's the primary culprit for my kind of awakening, shall we say? Because that's a thing I have had to reconcile over the years, is that for as much as people who know me now look at me as someone who's really passionate about historical things and in the past, I know that I wasn't that way. Like, I know that I didn't, to a point where, you know, it wasn't hostile towards it, but I certainly wasn't interested in it. And that's fine, but I think that, Bill's class was great in that he had several different, he had so many different courses in that program. One of them, I think, that I would say was a great one for me is the I think it was called the building analysis class, and that was where you would learn how to document a historical structure, identify its characteristics, research its past, and essentially go through a sort of investigative process where you try to tease out changes over time, where what things are original, what things are different, and how to kind of find the clues. If it's a square nail, if it's a wood sash window, if it's a wallpaper, if it's a fenestration thing, understanding the kind of mechanics of buildings and being able to sort of look for those clues. I think that class was a real revelation for me, and it's served me well in the years since then. And I also met Bob Liebershaw taking courses at that time, and I would say Bob gets a lot of credit for showing me. He just developed a real passion and knack for research, and showing me the resources that exist and the kind of power that they wield when you leverage them in service of different objectives. And I think those two things together really kind of started a chain reaction that was, unstoppable, and is kind of still fueling me to this day in all my interests.
In your estimation, what is the most important historic structure that's still standing around to this day? Or it could be several structures, even if you have like a top three for your personal favorites.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the districts are significant. You know, I tend to take a more broader view of historical. You know, I think it's dangerous to be myopic about buildings, and looking at specific buildings as, you know, sort of the fundamental anchors of significance. I think that there are landmarks. Certainly, as controversial as it is, you know, the McKinley statue was a landmark. You know, it had a lot of charged, you know, significance and meaning to it. Um, its removal is a significant event, and it'll serve as a milestone in the years to come. As far as things that remain, I think the courthouse in some ways is an important landmark, even though it's not the original courthouse. It's still in the site of the original courthouse. And as a consequence of it remaining in that location, its centrality to both the city of Eureka and the county is, I think, you know, it is an epicenter of sorts. It certainly is for what I have in my postcard collection. Everything radiates out from that point. I would say, if I was to pick a center point of what I have in my collection, it's that location. So I don't put a lot of time into thinking of single structures, but I think that that building has gotten to the point where it's of an age that it's achieved its own significance, and its location is still helps to illustrate views and scenes and moments in local history, that um, are accessible because of that, because people are so familiar with it.
Absolutely. So you've gone to school, you've learned about local architectural history, you're visiting all these places in Humboldt County. What gets you shifted to focus on collecting postcards of all things?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's a little weird, but it might make sense if I try again. I've told it before, but you know, when I was taking courses at College of the Redwoods, I was learning about doing research on local history. I was visiting places like the Humboldt County Historical Society, the Humboldt Rooms at the Cal Poly Library, and the county library. And I was encountering these kind of vast collections of resources. And I think everyone who kind of starts to get the bug for research has that bittersweet feeling of, oh man, I only got an hour left and then I got to go. What do I
Mm.
focus on? You know, it's tough, you know. And I remember feeling that kind of frustration, you know, like I wish I could just sit with this book for longer, but I only got another 20 minutes. So I started to look for some of the older books that I wanted to use that are primary sources on eBay, because I didn't know where else to look, locally. And in in doing these kind of broad searches for Humboldt history, or, you know, that kind of thing, I started to see results that were postcards. And I just wasn't expecting it. I didn't set out to start looking for Humboldt postcards. I was looking for some local history books, and in searching for them, I started to see these auction images for various scenes. And it didn't take long before I went, oh, whoa, is that, wow, that's Fifth Street, or oh, that's Fort Seward, or oh my gosh, I've never, wow, you know. And then I know you're familiar with this. It just kind of snowballed really quickly. I would say the other thing that happened, I'm going to blame him for sure, is Scott Brown, the former co-owner of Eureka Books. I went in there after collecting for a bit, and I brought some of my postcards, and I think someone had, oh, I know why. It was when I was trying to find Leon. I was trying to figure out, I didn't know who he was, but there was someone who was outbidding me on all these auctions, and I was trying to figure out if it was potentially the owner of Eureka Books. So I brought my postcards in there and I started talking to him, and then found out it wasn't him. But then he started telling me about collecting postcards, and he started telling me, he just gave me enough information. He explained to me what a real photo postcard was, an actual photograph on cards. You know, there were less cards of Arcata, but often more of Eureka. What to look for in terms of cards that were more rare than others. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and speaking with Scott Brown at Eureka Books, I got a crash course in postcard collecting from somebody who, you know, sells historical images and understands the value and the uniqueness of them. And that, I think, really kind of awakened a new kind of understanding of the field of collecting or the hobby, and because I had just been clumsily acquiring things without ever studying anything about it at that point. And then lastly, I think it was sharing the images because of where I work at the county planning department. The images would come to my PO box in Henderson Center. I check my mail on a daily basis, and I would return to the office with a new crop of images that I got, and I would start showing them to people around the office, and I would see. I mean, it would resonate with almost everyone. No one ever was like, I don't want to see it. They would all be like, wow, look at that. And then I would watch as, in a sample size of 20 different people that I work with, it was amazing how there were 20 different things that were were what's the word I'm trying to say, 20 different observations that were unique observations, which to me illustrated it's important that these things are showed to a larger audience, because there's just things that there's, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, those 1,000 words don't come from just one person looking at them. A lot of different people's perspectives, and they just notice different things. So that to me was exciting, seeing that, one, they were exciting to other people. Two, that sharing them with people really yielded new insights for myself and others. And then learning about the field of collecting and all that together, that really kind of just cemented my passion at that point, and I was hopelessly, addicted.
Can you speak more to the larger importance of preserving these scenes? Like I'm completely with you there that when you share a historic image, especially on social media like Facebook, the amount of comments that you get from people, amount of stuff that you would never hear otherwise. Like you'll likely never meet half the people that comment, but you both just enjoy looking at these scenes, and they just have the most fantastic of memories to share. Well, ultimately, who's it all for in the end? Is it for folks like you and I? Is it for the people that are looking at them now? Is it for folks down the road? Who would you say it's all for?
I'd say it's all of the above, really. It's for the people that are living now that appreciate these things, the people that don't even realize they appreciate it, but once you put it underneath their nose, they're excited. It's about the people that yield insight into these things that are not accessible to people like me, that have a certain timeline, right? I only go back to 95 in Humboldt. I can't speak beyond that. And then it's also a resource for the future, without a doubt, because anyone who does research sees how these types of exercises, whether it be a collection that was donated to an institution that was kept intact, like a family collection, or things like the Susie Baker fountain papers at Cal Poly, or the Martha Roscoe files at the Historical Society, these kind of people that did their own research and compiled information are extremely valuable. But even the images themselves, whether they're all unified under a single person's passion, or just added to a larger archive, they're very valuable. And especially when you have the information that what you're looking at, and someone can find it. And that's the kind of that. So and I think to that end, I'm trying to say that I feel a sense of uh I have a pressure that I feel not just compulsion, but like a um like almost a guilt or something, that I got to get this stuff out there to the public as quick as I can, because the people that can actually latch into those images and hang on to information that would otherwise be unknown or lost don't stick around forever. That window of opportunity narrows each day that goes by, and the people that have the knowledge are not going to be around. And that's the kind of morbid reality of it. So, like you said, social media has come on the scene and created just an incredible opportunity for institutions and individuals to harness the power of, to crowdsource essentially the power of the knowledge base that lies out there, but is otherwise dormant unless you engage with it, right? in the past, the Historical Society would only maybe encounter that through they publish an article in the Historian, people would respond with letters to the editor, correcting mistakes or adding to the narrative, or someone would give a talk and then someone would arrive at the talk and say, but did you know this? Or, well, we can do that live now practically through social media. And if we're not doing that, I don't think we're fulfilling our mission, frankly. That's kind of the way I see it. And I get that there's a generational divide and that, the folks that I serve on the board with, and there's a whole host of them that just that's not a way they operate and they don't know how to engage in that way. But I have a foot in both worlds and I feel a real obligation to utilize that platform and utilize that and get that and harvest that information as quickly as I can while the opportunity still exists, if that makes sense.
And I would say that's something that really separates you from general collectors or even institutions, is that you recognize you're not getting nothing out of sharing something. Like what you're getting out of it is the stories that go along with the piece of history that you're sharing. And that in and of itself winds up being, in some ways, even more valuable than the original object itself. And just the personal satisfaction of getting that from sharing it with people. And as somebody that looks at all the comments that people will post on other things that appear on Facebook, Instagram, it's always just a delight to see how much people have to share. Folks of all ages that go, wow, I didn't know that that was there, or wow, I have X, Y, and Z memories of this place. And did you know that if you turned around and looked in this direction, you would have seen something else even cooler that there's not a lot of photos of? And yeah, it is. It's always just a treat to see that interaction with people. Are there any?
Honestly, sorry, is it okay if I tee off of that real quick?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Knowing people like Bob Liebershaw and Susie Van Kirk when she was alive, and Jerry Rhodey, getting to know these people and watching how they work and operate. And I maybe I wouldn't put Jerry Rhodey in this camp, but a lot of them are just so good at what they do, but they have a limit to where it's like where the digital starts, that's the end of their skill set. And so social media, online resources, everything that lies beyond that digital divide is they can't avail themselves of it. They need a proxy like me or someone else to facilitate it. And often they just focus on the things that they can do, and they work with the physical materials and the collections and the knowledge that they have of those things that are hard-won knowledge. But I see this, I feel so excited to be able to basically collaborate and cross that boundary, augment what they're doing, and watch how it informs, because you can't just be in the digital world, and you can be in the physical world, but you're losing out on some real key opportunities for pulling back the curtain on things that otherwise you don't have another way to do it. And so that's a kind of a really exciting part of living right now. I'm in my lifetime, computers came and flourished, but I remember the time before and I remember the time after. And thankfully I had parents that had a PC and gave me a head start, and I didn't have any antipathy towards using computers even when it was very unpopular around here. And now I've been able to really harness that in my career and in my personal pursuits. And I just think that I love that when you can use the best of both worlds. You can have people that know where the physical archives are, know how to navigate them successfully, and then you dovetail with the digital world. That to me is one of the most exciting kind of things that I get to do, frankly.
Absolutely. And as much as it's about the scenes in each postcard as well, it's also about the people that are featured, and those comments that you get from folks that take a look at these that will go, hey, that's my family member. And there's no information usually written on the front of these things. And that's, to me, is as valuable as anything, is just finding out that insight and going, wow, now we have a name with the face, and that person had an entire history usually of living in Humboldt on top of it. And you just go down the rabbit hole very quickly. And that's, as a historian, that's as fun as it gets, in my estimation. Now, you have a website called the Humboldt Project, which is also now on Facebook and Instagram as well. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's currently kind of dormant, my website, because it was built with a Flash-based kind of architecture that's now kind of gone, become obsolete. My New Year's resolution was to rebuild it and make it a way better version of itself, and it's to do it before the end of 2024, not 2023. Um, and But that's the website. And the website, when it's relaunched, hopefully by early next year, it will feature upwards of 10,000 postcards that are um, searchable by subject, date, photographer, all of the different ways you can slice and dice, so that, and location, that kind of thing. Because that's why even though I have roughly 3,800 cards that are already scanned from my collection, I don't want to serve them up in the way that I currently could, because it would just be a frustrating exercise for people. Most people don't want to comb through. Maybe you and I would enjoy searching through thousands of postcards, but I don't want to do it that way. It's just too much. It'll turn people off. So that's coming in 2025. Now, the other things that I've sort of, social media, as we're talking about, has so much potential and so much information to be gathered that way. So you can't really be doing sharing of historical images and be neglecting that. If you are, you're falling short of opportunities that are very, very significant ones. And so I share things on Facebook, usually through my Instagram account, which is the Humboldt Project. And I started my Instagram account in October of 2022. And I did it because I'd been kicking around the idea for a while of trying to post images online on the anniversary date of the postmark. And it was something where I had an opportunity, had some free time to finally put towards it in late 2022, and I started it off around late October, and I just committed to doing it all of 2023. I posted an image every day that I had a card, and it ended up being 240 days out of the calendar year. And in many days, there were 6 or 7 images I posted, all postmarked on that same exact date, maybe different times in history. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of just see how the messages on the backs of the cards align to things that we can relate to on that calendar day, 100 years, 50 years, 60 years later. And it was really a fun challenge. I'm continuing to post cards because I didn't post every card that was sent from my collection, and my collection continues to grow, but it's not quite at the pace that I was last year. But yeah, that I think has been a really fun project, and I hope that it will pop up somewhere else. I'm in communication with Lost Coast Outpost and some other places about kind of republishing them in the future. And now that I've done the work, so what I would do is I post the image, I post the back of the card, and I post a transcription of the message as best I could do it to make it easy for folks. And yeah, it was just an endlessly fascinating thing, and it was a lot of work. I would do it all before I ran to work. I start my job every day at 8:30, and so I would get up early and just put the time in setting up the posts, so that I could get them up online. And that took up a lot of last year for sure, but it was well worth it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to relaunching it through somewhere different platform, possibly in the coming years.
And just the amount of time and monetary investment that you've put into this project. I mean, I know you're just like me, and every day we're going on sites like eBay and typing in these keywords like Humboldt, real photo postcard, and place names of Humboldt County, and just having the knowledge to even be able to go out and try and find these things, let alone then spending your time and money combing through them all, buying them, scanning them, and then getting them available online. It's just an incredible thing that you've put together. And to do this for thousands and thousands of postcards, it's just incredible. And again, that is the big thing that separates you from many locals that we've had around here that have been interested in doing this in the past, is your willingness to actually share that with the greater community, in a variety of formats. Like it's just wonderful stuff. If you had to share one or two of the most interesting things that you've seen on the writing side, so I mean, the images on the front are wonderful, but what I've found is that the writing on the back can be just as neat, if not cooler, than what's on the front, let alone the actual postmark stamp indicating where it was sent from on top of it. What are some of the more interesting stories that you've seen on the back of these postcards?
This card that I have right here just arrived 3 days ago. It's pretty neat. It's a, I don't know, well, you won't be able to see it very well, but it's a picture of Fernbridge, and it's kind of a neat view of Fernbridge because it shows the ramps going up to it. It's taken from the Ferndale side. But the message on the back, and I'm just picking this because it's like it's impossible. I mean, there's so many messages and they're all really interesting, but I might as well just pull. This is the freshest card in my collection. So, it's dated July 30th of 1912. It was stamped canceled at 8 a.m. in Fortuna. And so it was sent to Stockton from Fortuna, ostensibly. It says, Dear Grandma Ruth, I am still having a good time. We are at Fortuna now. It is just like Santa Cruz weather. I only weigh 132 now. I think 132 pounds. Have to let all my dresses out. Just think of it. How are you? I am just fine. Love to you, Hazel. I mean, it's a fairly banal message, but it still captures your imagination. Like 132 pounds, she has to let her dresses out. Did she just have a baby? Is she, you know, just, being self-deprecating, or why are they in Fortuna? Why do they know Santa Cruz? Why was it sent to Stockton? I mean, there's just an endless number of questions that come from it. There's some messages that really capture your imagination. One that I used in a piece I did for a magazine was an image. It was sent from Orleans in 1963, and it was mailed to, I can't remember what the destination was, but there's a guy who's just having the time of his life. It sounds like it. And it's really hard with the real estate you have to work with on a postcard to write something that's actually memorable. I mean, it's just, a lot of people just get to the point. I mean, so many of them are, Hi, how are you? I'm feeling good. Well, write me soon, I mean, or they run out of space and they haven't said anything hardly, but, hello. But this guy, in such a small amount of words, I've almost got it memorized. I'll go off what I can remember. He says, This is the full size of Orleans, the town I've been raving about. And it's a picture on the front of the Ishipishi Club, which lie on Highway 96 on the west side of 96 as you come through central Orleans. I mean, at that time in 1963, it was like a Jeep trail to get out there. It wasn't, Highway 96 of today. But he's saying, this is the town I've been raving about. Tonight there's a dance in the schoolhouse. They say it'll end around midnight because everybody's too drunk from then on. Tomorrow I'm going wild blackberry picking. If I get lucky, we'll can you a few pints. In the matter of just like 5 sentences, he's painted a picture of Orleans in 1963 in the summertime of someone who's just having a great time, experiencing the culture of the area, and that's just this indelible impression. And I don't know that guy. I mean, but he's kind of infected me with that message, even though I just picked it up on eBay, 10 years ago. So it is remarkable. The messages really have actually kind of eclipsed the things that I remember the most fondly in my collection are the messages on the back, not the fronts.
Yes, I'm right there with you. And you and I have gone back and forth on the line sharing scenes of our local railroad being built. And there's one story that I've got in particular, because I have two, I'm always on a quest to find more images on that front, was a picture of three guys standing on a steam shovel in Fort Seward, which is in southern Humboldt County. And on the back side of the card, I believe the fellow's name was Frank Onstein. And it's a very short note, but it basically says that this is me standing in this photo. The guy swung by to take the picture, but very shortly after this picture was taken, we were caught up in a landslide and I lost my arm as a result of working on this project. And it's just incredible that he had the forward thinking to put this down, and using other sources available like newspapers.com you can punch in his name into these word searchable text in the newspaper, and sure enough, it noted in the Ferndale Enterprise that he did get injured on the job while working in Fort Seward. But we wouldn't have these details if we didn't have this little postcard, this little primary source that's afforded to us. So every card has its own story as to where not only the scene that's featured, but the place it came from and the people that are in it. It's all the way around just a very fun set of stories. And not so much in Frank's case, but it's history nonetheless.
I'll be honest. I mean, when I was doing, almost every day postcard posting last year for the Instagram account, it was oftentimes frustrating because I would be posting it and I think, oh, I know like 20 different ways I can completely expand the narrative of this. There's so many sources I could bring to bear and really flesh this all out, but I got to go to work, you know? And so I'm just going to put the transcript up and that's that. And I would show it to someone like Bob Livershaw and he would go, well, did you look at the Sanborn maps? We can find that address. And what about the city directories? You can totally, like, I know, but I can't, it's one of 10,000,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's remarkable. Each one is a complete rabbit hole.
And that's the door that you're leaving open for everyone that looks at each one of them. Like everyone's going to see something different. Everyone's going to want to go and try and find out as much as they can. And if your uh, mission is to share this, then people are going to take it upon themselves to make it their mission to find out as much as they can using their own interest in what you provide. So it's wonderful. Are there particular scenes out there that you know are more rare than others, like particular communities, or maybe there's a postcard that you've heard about that you've been on the lookout for years and years? Is there anything like that that maybe the folks watching might be able to help you with there?
Yeah. I mean, it probably doesn't surprise anybody, but, the further into the hinterlands you get, the more the population of postcards shrinks and dwindles to hardly anything. I probably have upwards of 500 postcards of Eureka in my collection, if not more. Arcata, maybe 200 to 300. Um, but when you look at something like Blocksburg or Witchbeck or Soames Bar, Alder Point or Fort Seward or Fruitland or, Cape Town or something, it's a matter of maybe two or three or four cards, I mean, some of them more than others, but, those areas are just not as well covered. And the photographers that went to those places, Southern Humboldt's generally less covered than Northern Humboldt, but Northeastern Humboldt beyond Willow Creek is far less cards you'll find in those areas. So yeah, I would say anywhere outside of the greater Humboldt Bay area, from like north of Trinidad, northeast of Willow Creek, um, basically east of the main stem of the Eel River, or even along the main stem of the Eel River, and west of Highway 101 in southern Humboldt. Those areas are much lower numbers of cards, um, and so they're a treasure every time one shows up. It's exciting.
Absolutely. When looking at all the different postcards that you've got, aside from the theme of Humboldt, are there any particular themes that you see more often than others, or even just topics that appear very often too?
Yeah, well, I definitely have grouped things into kind of topics on the message side, on the fronts of the cards, I would say, the images generally group along in the more developed areas of the county. There's always going to be an interest in trying to document architectural buildings, especially the bigger the building, the more shrewd I think as a photographer it would be wise to say, oh, the Masons are going to want a picture of their building, or City Hall is going to be a popular one to share, or steamships coming in and out of the bay. Once you get outside of those things, the tourist infrastructure along the Redwood Highway is a major theme. Diane Hawk's books along, talking about the old Redwood Highway really profile a lot of that era of cards that were done in service of people that might want a souvenir from their trip. Then it just turns into kind of the cards kind of after that. The rarest cards are the ones that it took a while to kind of figure it out, but I guess amateur photography was coming on the scene as the postcard era was dawning. Like the postcard era, that is the golden age that people define, generally starts around the turn of the century, and it's mostly because there was changes in U.S. postal regulations that were pivotal. Like prior to the 1900s, the only cards that you could use for postcards were mass-produced, federally issued cards by the U.S. Postal Service, and they had canned, lithographic images on the front, and you can only get them that way. In 1905, they made it to where anyone could take a photograph and put it on a postcard, and as long as it was the right dimensions, you could send it in the mail. And then they changed it to where you couldn't write anything other than the message on the back, or sorry, the address on the back, and they changed it to where you could have a divided back. So then you had some room to actually put a message. Otherwise, people would write on the front in whatever area they could find. So when that all changed in 1905, there was also, Kodak was producing the Brownie cameras and things that people could buy that were, had a little bit of money that could afford it. And so you see amateur photography coming on the scene, and those cards are extremely rare because there probably was only one made, and they aren't being produced for a mass audience. So they're very idiosyncratic. A lot of times it's family photos that you wouldn't be able to find on eBay because they wouldn't be listed by anything that you might be looking for. But when there is something in there that's a clue, and the seller or the dealer is shrewd enough to understand that, those images are very, very valuable because they just provide very unique insight into very specific landscapes and views and things that you would otherwise never find in any other collection, or one of a kind. So those ones definitely get the collectors drooling over stuff. But messages on the back, just to kind of cover that part a little bit, is I found that the things that people write to each other on these cards, they weren't they're not dated. They're just using a medium that isn't a popular medium anymore. So the things they say, oftentimes, in my mind, I think about it when I read the message. I'm like, okay, today that would have been a text message, or that would have been a voicemail, or that would have been an email, and but it doesn't change that we're saying those same things to each other. We just don't use postcards as the way to do it. So they're very relatable in a lot of ways, and it's kind of fun to think about, like, okay, what vehicle would we have used today? I have cards that say, hey, please, I have to cancel my haircut appointment on Thursday. And there was a picture of the Eureka Inn that was mailed to San Francisco by somebody who was visiting the area and wasn't going to make it back in time. That would have been probably a text message.
Yeah.
but but then there's things like, I'm going to send you the payment for that thing that I owe you, and I will have it by next week. Look for a letter. That probably would have been an email because it's a business transaction. And then other things that are more in between. So yeah, it's a fun to read those messages, and you get to play a voyeur. You're kind of reading other people's mail at the end of the day, and yeah, it's kind of neat.
Excellent. We're just going to take a brief pause here. Hi there, folks. I hope you're enjoying Night at the Museum this evening. Please take a look at our online auction. There are plenty of great things available for you, and every dollar that you give us counts towards us achieving our mission of preserving and sharing the varied history of Northwestern California. We're joined right now by Steve Lazar, the postcard king of Humboldt County, and we're going to dive back into some topics right now. So if you had to pick a site, either that you've seen in a postcard or otherwise, what is your go-to place in Humboldt for both nature and history, or one of the two? You had to pick a favorite place.
Places that I visit in my life today.
Yeah, places that you're if you had to just clear the air and or go out and just get away from it all for a second in Humboldt, where would you go?
Yeah, one place that's kind of risen to the top. There's probably two potential contenders, but these are places that I visit, fairly regularly, certainly annually, and oftentimes more than once a year. Um, One of them is Stone Lagoon, um, or Chapek Okito. The the Stone Lagoon area always captivated me. Actually, on one of those early bike rides I did when I moved here, when we rode our bikes to Oric, I remember passing the lagoons and thinking, wow, that looks so cool over there. I wish I could visit that, but I don't have a canoe or a car or anything. And so when I finally got a chance to do it, 5 years later, something like that, it was really great. And I've now done it so many times, and there's a lot of secrets to Stone Lagoon that are, I won't say publicly, but there are some pretty remarkable aspects to it that I've discovered only through visiting a place. And I think that place too has helped me understand how you can never do the same hike more than once. The landscape changes on a daily basis, especially along the coastline. But that's a hike, and that's an area that I've covered, at this point, 30 plus times at least, and a boat ride, a paddle that I've done that many times, and it's never the same. And I've learned a lot every single time. So that this studying a place and taking it all in, and feeling the power of it. And there's just things about that. But the other place that I've visited a lot is the old lighthouse, perch at Cape Mendocino. And it's not really set up for public visitation, but it is technically public property. It's federally owned land owned by the Coast Guard. There's not a sign or a trailhead or anything to find it, but I sussed it out years ago with a friend, an adventure partner, and I've visited it, countless times over the years. And yeah, Cape Mendocino is a wild place, and appreciating how extreme of an environment that really is out there, and how what it would have been like to live there and maintain the lighthouse and be stationed. Yeah, it is always exciting for me. I love going back there, and I like those places that are kind of not as publicly known. But I'm actually kind of, in my recent years, I've started to kind of focus on visiting places that are very popular, because I realized I've been so interested in kind of finding the obscure places that I've lost out on some of the things that are amazing because they're just super, super frequented by other people. But yeah, I'm starting to kind of really go in some of the more common places now and finally revisit those or visit them for the first time.
Yes, nothing wrong with visiting the classics for sure. What does the Clarke Museum mean to you, or even local historical institutions in general?
Yeah, it's changed over the years, but to me at this point in time, I would say the thing that I've grown to kind of appreciate and recognize about the Clarke Museum is that we don't have as many museums in this county as we could or should. Um, the I don't have all of the gory details, but I do know that the Historical Society and the Clarke were, bosom buddies, and had, kind of our histories, interwoven, and collections. Something that people lose sight of with the Historical Society is that we were largely homeless for much of our history. We were lucky to receive the Barnum House as a donation when Helen Barnum died, and that was in 1992. So only since then have we had a physical location that we actually owned and controlled. So our collections kind of mingled with other collections, and so there were decision points along the way, long before I was ever involved, where large objects and things that really led themselves to exhibition kind of became part of the Clarke Museum, as I understand it, and things that were more in the kind of documentary research side of things that wouldn't necessarily hold up to public display or be of as much value, those kind of landed at the Historical Society. So to me, the Clarke Museum plays a very important role of showcasing materials, serving as an amazing and dynamic exhibition place, but also in recent years, it's really kind of broadened to kind of, really provide be um, a sort of, I don't know, lightning rod for the collaboration we have with presenting the monthly lecture series that used to live at the library, being the place, like kind of the clubhouse of like local historical events, and as a basis and anchor during the monthly Arts Alive events. I think, and then the online and the sort of public interaction and engagement. I think Clarke has just really outshined the historical society in a lot of ways in that way, and I'm really grateful to see that. And I think as an institution, the historical society has a ways to go. We can learn a lot from the model that the Clarke has served to show for how you can really create an online footprint.
And I've taken, I think we have a lot to learn, especially with how excellent the social media has been over at the Historical Society, especially in the past year. The amount of engagement that I see regularly online, and it's the same kind of thing that you're doing, where it's the sharing of these historic images that resonate with people and get people to buy in, let alone the Humboldt Historian quarterly magazine, which is just fantastic that you guys do. But I've always seen us as kind of two halves of the same bird. You guys have the primary source photographs and written down stories, the maps, and then we've got all the stuff that makes it into the display cases, more or less. So it's two things that are ultimately focused on the preservation of Humboldt history, but we're just approaching it in kind of two lanes on the same road, more or less. Is there anything that you think that folks around here should know more about when it comes to local historical preservation?
Yeah, I think people make assumptions about things being sort of what's the word? I think a lot of people know, well, okay, first and foremost, everybody mixes up who's who, right? I know you from the so I think for the vast majority of the public, the Humboldt County Historical Society, the Clarke Museum, the Eureka Heritage Society, the Arcata Site Society, the Ferndale Museum, they're all just one group and nobody has any distinguishing, it's all one big thing. It's not. It's a bunch of different private, nonprofit organizations struggling to achieve their missions with limited funding and limited staff and volunteers and overwhelming uh, you know, challenges. And then just continue to grind away. So that first and foremost is that they really, it's if you value history, don't take it for granted that everything's taken care of and it's all going to work whether you participate or contribute. It isn't. It's very fragile. As you know, I've been embroiled in this newspaper boondoggle for the last 2.5 years, and to me that's been illustrative of what is the reality of the situation, which is, the Historical Society inherited the Times Standards archive of newspapers. It wasn't as vast as we were hoping, but once we sorted it out and figured it out and realized it was a 20-year range of the papers from 95 to 2015, nobody wanted to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I mean, the reality is people were like, hey, we've got it on microfilm. Why are we even messing with this? We don't have the money to do this. We don't have the space to house it. And but for the partnership with the Timber Heritage Association, who has been generously letting us use that space for the past 2 years plus now, it would have been recycled, thrown away 2 years ago, or at least any time in the last 2 years, it would have been lost because it just was not tenable. And that's just one little piece of a much larger fabric of resources that are very vulnerable to loss. And then the other part, I guess, and so why it's so important to not take for granted that this stuff is getting saved and that everybody has everything they need to do it, and endless space and financing and whatnot. All these organizations rely on the funding of the people that are part of our institutions that become members. So if you and then I think there's a lot of people that don't value local history as much as they should, but I don't blame them for that. I think it's just they haven't had that awakening yet. They don't see how much they can really kind of how much enjoyment can be derived from just a cursory knowledge of certain things. So that to me is always a fun challenge of finding the right angle of attack to get someone interested in something. I know that it's possible. You just have to kind of approach it from the right place. And then lastly, I think the thing that to me, once you're part of the club and you recognize you gotta help support these things, don't think that just supporting it is enough. Volunteering, participating is fundamental. The historical society had no paid staff for much of our history, and it was only in recent years that that's developed. And so really for us to function and to actually begin kind of making advancements on the collections that we save and administer, it requires volunteer effort. It requires greater contribution and financial support. And so just putting things in a box that's acid free and on a shelf in a place that is protected from the elements, that's the bare minimum. Like having finding aids and digital ways of accessing things remotely, those advancements have to continue, or the collection doesn't actually fulfill the goal of the organization.
Right.
Having it hiding in plain sight is not doing anyone any good. So really there's a lot of work to be done. That's the kind of uncomfortable reality, in terms of unlocking the potential of these collections and making it's not that everything has to live in digital environments, but we have to make it more remotely accessible. And if nothing else was learned during the COVID, we learned that we have to find a way to be remote. We can't have everybody coming through our doors. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great things being done, but people really need to understand that these organizations are not wealthy and not well endowed, and require the careful support and constant support annually, or it can really be lost.
Absolutely. We couldn't agree more. Any other suggestions you have to get, especially young people, enticed into working with us? How can we get them to buy in to local history, especially if they're not necessarily from here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been experimenting with different things, over the last 10 or 15 years. I think one thing that I've done that sort of, I think you have to bring the history to the people. You can't say, hey, we're having a thing and come on out. We want to see you. I trust us. It's going to be really amazing. No, it doesn't quite do it. Social media is great. Definitely, you can see there's an appetite for historical images, for historical information. But I really do think, and I think Historical Society and the Clarke Museum, for that matter, have been good about this in the past, but maybe we sometimes lose sight of it, which is inserting yourself into the fabric of the community at strategic locations and being ready to engage people, having those conversations, finding the right way to kind of connect someone to the materials and your mission. Those are the things that I think ultimately pay dividends, and it's a frustratingly kind of slow task. You can't just like turn 25 people on at once. It may be just one conversation at a time, one event at a time, but it will pick up it will build momentum. You kind of make inroads into certain peer groups and populations of people, and then it just kind of grows from there. Those people become ambassadors for your organization, essentially. So I think we've really fallen short of engaging with the younger audience, and there's no one thing you can do. But I think getting outside of your four walls of your institution and being in the community and bringing something to the party other than just a brochure. You need to have stuff to kind of unlock people. What I do when I volunteer at like the county fair, for instance, I bring postcards from my collection. I'll volunteer to table for the historical study, but I'll bring postcards from my collection. I'll see someone, I'll ask them where do they live. You live in Humboldt County? Yes. Where do you live in Humboldt County? Okay. Ask them something about, you want to see a picture of that? And as soon as I've done that, you just see the wheels turning. You're like, wait, where are you? What are you from again? So you gotta get into it. And I do believe pretty strongly at this point, for whatever reason, I don't have an explanation, but you don't move to Humboldt County and stay without becoming uh, fascinated on a deep level with this area. Like the people that stick around, they're no different than you or I. They just maybe aren't as vocal about it. And so I never meet anyone in our community that live here that don't have a deep appreciation or interest in the geography of their places. They just do. They can't help it. So that's a real. I think that's a an asset that you should never really lose sight of as an organization if you're involved in local history stuff, is that people are interested. You just have to meet them where they are, and you got to be ready to kind of capture their attention. You got to bring things to the party.
Absolutely. And I think that you've got an excellent hook when you go to those tabling events. It's between you and Jim Garrison yelling, "Hey, I have your grandpa's stuff." Like, and it's just like, wait a second, what? It's like, no, really. I have your family history and you need to buy in because I'm selling. And it's a lot of fun to just see people's eyes light up when they realize that they have access to that level of information about not just the community, but the people that live here too. And finding ways to just hook people consistently and get them in here through a range of topics is always entertaining. Well, are there any other things that you'd like folks to know, Steve, at this point?
I think just, if you see me around, there's a pretty good chance I've got postcards on me. I try to keep them close at hand, and I'm always willing to give them away to new folks. And I love talking about this county. I love this county very much, and I'm grateful for every day that I get to live here. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, for folks that kind of take an interest in our landscapes and in our county and its future. It's said, don't history repeats itself or whatever, or if it doesn't, it certainly I don't know, but
Right.
it's not. Yeah, it knows how to. Yeah, I think that the thing is, like, I often see a real blind spot to historical landscapes in people that otherwise have a great deal of um, concern and attention to the environment around us. But it's like you're really hamstrung when you're trying to read the environment if you don't have access to some of the narrative that's so fundamental. Like one of the biggest things that I think one of the biggest uh, mistakes people make is that they think that there are pristine areas of our county that are untouched, like completely never before seen any influence of people. And whether it's colonial settlement, of the 1850 onward, or indigenous use, there's no part of the land that hasn't been manipulated. It's just that is part of our history. And understanding those chapters and how they dovetail and lead into the present, it's so valuable. And whether it's the town you live in or the places you like to hike or the culture of an area that you live in, it doesn't it understanding the historical events that are the foundation to it, and the effects on the landscape is pivotal to really actually deepening your knowledge of the present. And that's, I think, what people can get, and that's what keeps me coming back to the pot when it comes to collecting postcards and images, and wanting to just continually deepen my knowledge of now using the past.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you very much, Steve, for sharing everything that you have. And thank you very much for tuning in. And we've got more for you here in just a minute.